When my husband, and you all know was a Carolyn pilot, on trips, my children would say to me, Mom, tell us a story. And so I would write them down and read them the story that I wrote, because I had to have something. You couldn't just tell them, you had to read it. So the first one I wrote was about Chubby, who was a little airplane that couldn't fly because he didn't have an engine. And then the next one I wrote was about a rooster that none of the other barnyard animals liked because he couldn't say cock-a-doodle-doo, he could only say cock-a-doodle-roo. And the other animals didn't like it. And so anyway, we moved to Raleigh when our son was 18 and our daughter was 16, and we'd been there about 4 days, and Spike went on a trip, and the kids said, Mom, tell us a story. And so I wrote a story about two people that I knew, and changed it a little bit, and read it to them. And the next night they wanted more and more and more. So that's how I started. And so I had written stuff, it was all the scraps of paper all over the house, stuffed in drawers. And so I had a good friend from, can't think of the name right now, he's in North Carolina, Clayton, North Carolina, who lived in my neighborhood. And she came over one day to swim, and we were sitting up by the pool, and we started talking about debutante. She would make her debut in Clayton. We started talking about it, and I said, well, I've written a little something about a debutante. Let me read it to you. Well, she got so excited, and she said, you have to write a book. You have to put all this together and write a book. And so that's how the book came to be. My friend, her name was Faye Gully, had cancer. And I moved to Florida, but we still had our house in Raleigh. And every time I came home, I would read a chapter to Faye. And I got the whole thing read before she passed away, but it says, in honor of Spike and Ashley, and in memory of Faye Gully, a North Carolina debutante and my biggest fan. Susan said many times, you write what you know, and definitely you do. So many people think that this book is about the Holly Ball, and they think it's about Lancaster County, but when I've spoken to book clubs all over, they say, I know everybody in that book. I say, well, you need to tell the people in my hometown, because all of this is about it. But you realize I have never been sued. So, but I just want to read you the prologue of how this came to be. And this is all fiction. The Magnolia Ball is one of the longest running debutante balls in the South. It began as a birthday party a local tobacco and cotton farmer of some wealth gave for his daughter in 1892. He lived near Pontiac in Dorchester County, South Carolina, which is located between Hilton Head, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. And I just had to brag for a minute. I didn't even know there was a Dorchester County in South Carolina. But 2 years after the book was published, I was named the Outstanding Citizen of Dorchester. And only 3 other people have received this award before me. Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. Mr. Beecham owned several hundred acres of land and employed many servants as well as the hands who worked in the fields. He owned a large center hall colonial house stocked with furniture shipped over from England. That shipment traveled first to Savannah and then was transported by barge to his estate. On the rolling front lawn of Mr. Beecham's estate, Beachland, clever, huh? Stood a perfectly shaped 75-foot magnolia tree. People came from miles around to gaze upon the splendor of its flowers that bloomed each summer. Every year during the Christmas holidays, Mrs. Beecham used the perfectly shaped magnolia leaves to decorate the fan she braided from grapevines. She then placed a large pineapple in the center and surrounded it with red apples. The festive decoration hung majestically over the marble fireplace in the great room through the holiday season. Mr. Beecham's daughter, Celeste, who resembled her father, was a plain, homely girl with a hook nose, a lantern jar, and she was none too bright. She was nearly 18 and unmarried, an old maid. She had never had a gentleman call her or been courted by a gentleman. As far as anyone knew, she had never had a male head turned in her direction other than to snicker and to point. Celeste, despite her lack of beauty, was a special child. She had been born on Christmas Day. As her 18th birthday approached, her parents fretted over a way to get Celeste safely married to anyone, whether he be old, hungry, ugly, or poor. Mrs. Beecham, a beautiful woman who was from a family long on background and short on cash, had consented to marry the rather unattractive Mr. Beecham, a gentleman to the manor born, some 20 years prior. While Mr. Beecham was dull and quiet, Mrs. Beecham was imaginative, perky, and garrulous. One day, she was on the front lawn gathering the leaves for the Christmas fan. As she was admiring the tree, she noticed Celeste gazing out of the second-story window. Because of the direction the sun was shining, the shadow of magnolia leaves seemed to form a band across Celeste's head, framing her face. For a moment, Celeste looked almost regal, as if she were wearing a crown. Her daughter did have confidence about her that showed in her straight posture and the way she held her head so high. Mrs. Beecham was suddenly struck with an idea. She and Mr. Beecham were going to have a Magnolia Ball for Celeste's 18th birthday party. All of the young men from miles around would be invited. The highlight of the evening would be when Mr. Beecham proclaimed Celeste Queen of the Magnolia Ball and crowned her with the tiara of magnolia leaves Mrs. Beecham had woven. Mrs. Beecham planned to make Celeste an absolute confection of a gown in pure white to attest to her virginity, as if there were any doubt. She would curl Celeste's hair, pinch her cheeks for color, and add a touch of berry stain to her lips. She remembered the belladonna that she would drop into the blue eyes to dramatize them. Celeste would also wear the family heirloom pearl choker and drop earrings that would put the finishing touch on her masterpiece. Celeste would certainly look presentable, and when some of the young men drank sufficiently of Mrs. Beecham's potent eggnog, maybe, just maybe, someone might become inebriated enough to ask Mr. Beecham for Celeste's hand in marriage, or at least a dance. And then I'm going to skip over some, but anyway, Christmas night of 1892 arrived. Tables were laid with food in the huge dining room. Servants wore new uniforms and carried sterling silver trays filled with flues of French champagne and Mrs. Beecham's high-octane eggnog. Beechland was decorated as never before, and Mrs. Beecham had little tapers rather than the large candles and gas lights. The soft lighting enhanced the presentation of Celeste by not showing her every flaw to its greatest disadvantage. The best families came from 50 miles away. The prospective suitors, unaware of their roles, eagerly arrived. The least attractive girls of the surrounding 3 counties had been invited. All of the spinsters from 22 to 35 years old were in attendance. Celeste, conveniently, was the only girl between the ages of 16 and 21. The field was wide open. Okay, at the stroke of 9, the string quartet is playing, and Mr. Beecham presented to the guest Celeste, his beloved daughter and the birthday girl. She looked resplendent in an off-the-shoulder white satin gown with a gathered skirt and white satin heels. The heirloom choker and earrings and white elbow-length gloves complemented her gown perfectly. Pure white cotton was stuffed into the top of her corset to replace what the Lord had forgotten. Celeste, in all her vigors, with her hair waved and curled and her perfect posture, descended the mahogany stairs. The flickering of the tiny tables cast just the right amount of light on her imperfect countenance. By the time she reached the bottom step on her father's arm, the guests had begun to applaud. As the quartet struck up a Strauss waltz, Mr. Beecham took his daughter in his arms for the first dance of the evening. At that moment, the French champagne and Mrs. Beecham's eggnog took effect. A young man cut in on Mr. Beecham, and then another, and another. Celeste was in heaven, and the Magnolia Ball had become a legend in its own time. Now that's the background. Now what happens is, I'm not going to read to you. I talk about the committee. There are 7 ladies on the committee. And there are skeletons in their closet, all of which I reveal. And then I talk about 7 of the debutantes, young ladies. And there's a subplot. There's always a subplot in all my books. Now, Susan said, you write what you know, and I taught creative writing in New York. And I always told my students, Use the language that the people you're writing about would use. So get ready.
Lynn, take a chair before you fall over.
A lumberjack doesn't say, golly gee. So, and I know you're now going to be horrified, but you ladies, all of you who've ever been to the gynecologist are gonna relate. Darlene, who's on the committee, was dressing for her monthly doctor's appointment. She felt fat, gross, and disgusting. She had already gained 30 pounds and was only in her 7th month. Half-heartedly, she reached for an orange maternity dress, a blimp bag, as Joseph called it. I got that from Spike, because he used to call my maternity clothes blimp bags. She hated it when he referred to the dresses that way, only if it made her feel more unattractive. She hated being pregnant and couldn't wait to be small and trim and pretty and desirable again. Slipping the hard old rag over her head, she began to pull it down. Nothing she tried on fit, so in desperation, she put on a peasant blouse and a pair of black slacks with the creepy elasticized stomach area. At least her feet weren't huge. She bent over and put on her slingback hose and went down to the bus stop. Well, Mrs. Moreland, you gained 7 more pounds this month. Dr. Henderson isn't going to be happy with you, purred Samantha, her doctor's nurse. Screw Dr. Henderson, thought Darlene. Does he think I like feeling and looking like a beached whale? Instead, she replied, I don't know how I could have gained 7 pounds. All I eat is lettuce. I feel like a rabbit. Darlene was telling the truth. Samantha showed Darlene into the examining room, which in Darlene's opinion could have been called the Chamber of Horrors. Since her mother had never taken her to a gynecologist and hadn't bothered to explain the facts of life to her, Darlene's first visit had been quite an experience. She went behind the screen and took off her clothes and slipped the paper robe over her head. Some protection. The robe came just above her boots and was slit on both sides. Then she sat on a table at the edge, hopefully close enough so she wouldn't have to slide down while lying on her back for the doctor. She took the second piece of paper, the blanket, and put it on her lap. She looked at the table near her. On it was the dreaded speculum, a huge piece of cold metal. The doctor kept it in the refrigerator overnight. Often inserted and wrenched it into her to further open her. Probably so that if he couldn't find what he was looking for with his fingers and then his whole hand, he could conveniently insert his head also. There were the Q-tips for the pap smear test, which to Darlene looked 2 feet long, the rubber gloves, and the KY jelly. A lot of good that did when it came to the speculum. Next to the wall was the spotlight, which the doctor always put so close that she got a 3rd-degree burn on her butt, and numerous other torture devices. Dr. Henderson and the disgustingly thin Samantha entered the examining room. Dr. Henderson said, and how are we doing today, Mrs. Moreland? I hate that wee shit, thought Darlene. Fine. I understand from Samantha that you gained 7 pounds since your last month's checkup. See how fast the wee shit is? He didn't do any weight gaining, only I did. We were doing fine, but I gained the weight. Yes, I have. I don't know how I could gain that much weight, hardly anything. Now, Mrs. Moreland, just lie back and relax. Huh. That's good, said Dr. Henderson. He sat on the stool beside the spotlight and peered inside her body. Oh, Mrs. Moreland, you're going to have to slide forward a little. Of course I'm going to have to slide forward, thought Darlene. I could have sat suspended in midair with only my rear end touching the examining table, and I bet when I lay down I would have had to slide forward. Oh, just a little more. Another slide, like a giant oyster. Yes, that's good. Darlene thought, gynecologists must have learned in medical school to always make a 7-month pregnant woman lie on her back and slide forward. What a gruesome way to get one's kicks. And we go on and on, and we slip her feet up in stirrups. The humiliation was complete. She lay there like a cow with her feet in stirrups. The blanket was at knee level, so her entire body was exposed. The good doctor now moved to the right side of the examining table and ripped the paper robe. He began palpating her right breast while asking questions that Darlene thought were really inane. He asked, well, what have we been doing this past month? Have we had any problems, any indigestion, edema? As Darlene lay there, she thought, how in the hell am I supposed to carry on a normal conversation when this sadist is squeezing my breasts and my feet are up in the air? I know the Holy Grail is exposed to the window, and now I see ropes and a scaffold. Any minute, the window washers would be at eye level for the perfect view into my uterus. The good doctor went behind her, lived up the road, and so on and so forth. Darlene dressed. Samantha handed, when it's all over, Samantha handed Darlene a wipe and said, just go in the doctor's office with your dress. The wipe was the size of a single-ply cocktail napkin taken off half a tube of KY jelly. Darlene dressed and entered Dr. Henderson's office, where she sat and waited for 15 minutes while he examined and probed another unfortunate fat-pregnant woman. There was interesting reading material in the doctor's inner sanctum, too, with titles like, The 7 Symptoms of Ovarian Cancer, Breastfeeding the Easy Way. How many ways could there be? Do you suffer from postmenstrual stress syndrome? No, but I wish I did. I think it would be better than being pregnant, she thought. Henderson entered the room smiling. He told Darlene why she had been gaining so much weight and why she could expect to gain even more. Then he gave her the news he knew when he laid her. Darlene, I heard 2 distinct heartbeats today. You're going to have twins. Darlene fainted. Okay. I just want to tell you what happened. After I wrote the Magnolia Ball, I wrote Stolen Sons, which is a family saga. It's based on the maternal side of my family. A lot of it is true, but it is fictionalized. This part, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and I all lost our firstborn sons tragically. So I made an Indian curse. And if you see the Indian here, you can see the faces in the smoke. And that's why it's called Stolen Sons. But it starts out, and I'm just going to read you a tad of it. I'm not going to keep it too long. Because my grandfather really was 60 when he married my grandmother, and she was 20. The sound that erupted from her was somewhere between a squeal of a piglet desperately caught at a barbed wire fence and a wail of a legendary banshee. Real fast! Dropping the ear of corn he had been shucking, Rufus stumbled back into the corn crib, locked the door, and tore off the main house. What's the matter, Granddaddy? What is it? I'll tell you what it is. Here come Master Judge Deb by Angle Lane, and he's early. I ain't even got the biscuit dough done yet. You better get up here and eat and put them horses up. Glancing at the big clock on the kitchen mantel, Rufus exclaimed, Grandmammy, he's only 5 minutes early. Why do you get so upset? Because things is supposed to happen on time. He generally comes home at 5:45, and I bases everything on that time. Now here he is, and it's barely 5:40. Well, the judge comes home, and he goes into his study, and he has a glass of scotch, as he does every night. But when his wife was alive, she used to have a little sip of sherry in a very fancy glass. So Japonica, that's who was just talking, Japonica hears voices in the study, and she goes in there to see what's going on, and he tells her that there's only, it's only him. No one else is there. But he sipped his scotch and he looked at Fanny Drew across from him and he said, oh, Fanny Drew, why did you have to go to Liberty? And he talks to her and so forth. And then he says that he tells Fanny Drew that he had gone to Thomas's store that day and he had seen this beautiful girl named Leela. And he said, she reminded me so much of you. And he said he wrote a letter to her parents and asked if he could court her. And they said he could, and he was going to see her this night, tonight. When Japonica goes into the study, she finds the scotch glass and her sherry glass, and she says, Mr. Judge, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but when I cleared away your glass from the library, I seen something on Miss Fanny Drew's table. When I went and looked up close, it was her sherry glass, Mr. Judge, and it had sherry in it. And it was on one of her special napkins that she always used when she had her toddy in the evening. What do you make of that? He says, I think maybe Miss Fanny Drew played us a visit tonight, Japonica. That's what I think. She says, you does what? He said, I think Miss Fanny Drew was here tonight. I had something important to discuss with her, and I think she was here. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir, says Japonica. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she backed into the kitchen through the swinging door. White folks are crazier than darkish, Japonica said as she walked to the stove. Why is that, Grandmammy? Asked Rufus, who was carefully tossing Caesar salad. Because Mr. Judge done said that he had something important to discuss with Fanny Drew this evening, and so she was in the library with him earlier. What? That's what he said. He said she was in the library with him for his evening tidy tonight, because he had something important to discuss with her. Was she? Rufus, Miss Fanny Drew is dead, God rest her soul. How's she gonna be in the library? Well, I guess she ain't, but why did he say she was? Because I told him when I went in there to get his glass, there was one by Miss Fanny Drew's glass, and it had sherry, and it had sherry in it like she used to drink, and it was on one of her special napkins. What? You heard me, shut up. Well, what was Sherry doing in the glass on one of her special napkins? How would I know? Maybe she was there. Rufus, serve up the salad. 1 or 2. Woman, why would you fix 2? Well, if Miss Fanny Drew had sherry, maybe now she wants her dinner. Rufus, take Mr. Judge's salad. Hush your mouth before I take this frying pan to your head. Yes. Okay. And this goes all the way up to when our daughter graduated from college.
Wow.
So it starts in 1892 and ends in 1994. So then what happened was I developed some fans, and they loved the Magnolia Ball, and the heroine in the Magnolia Ball is an antagonist rather than a protagonist, and they loved her because she was so bitchy. So I wrote the second book. There she is. This book, I'm not going to read anything from it, but Benita, who's the heroine, moves away. She moves from Dorchester County to Spencer, Tennessee. And yes, there is a Spencer, Tennessee county. But in this book, I included a lot of Southern recipes. And then, I didn't bring the third one, I got it here. Then, they still loved her, mean as she was, and they wanted me to write about her again. So I wrote the conclusion. It's the Magnolia trilogy. I wrote the conclusion, and I told one of my friends, I said, I'm going to kill her. They said, you can't kill her. I said, I can. I created her. I can kill her. But I didn't. I made her good. Then nobody wanted to read about her anymore. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. And I have books available if you would like.
Thank you all for being here. We have some wine and water and some snacks next door. So take your time and stay as long as you like.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Yes. And thank all of you for coming. I appreciate it so much.